They said she was just another face in the base mess hall. The kind of officer who smiled too much for a captain, too soft around the edges to ever belong to the dirt and chaos of war. But when the channel opened that night, and her voice came through, calm, unwavering, and deadly precise, every man in that building stopped what they were doing. They realized then, she wasn't just another soldier. She was the reason they were still alive. If you agree that real strength hides behind quiet smiles, like and subscribe. This one's for the ones who lead when everything falls apart. The night had been unremarkable, the kind that made time blur together in the field. Dry air, sand biting through the tents, laughter echoing off the metal walls of the forward post. Captain Elena Brooks, 28, leaned back in her folding chair, her sleeves rolled to the elbows, smudges of oil still streaked across her forearm. She was laughing, the kind of laugh that came from the belly, full of life, shaking her shoulders as one of her sergeants tried to reenact how Private Langley had tripped into a trench earlier that morning. For a brief second, it didn't feel like a war zone. It felt like family, loud, flawed, stubborn, and alive. They'd been out there for 3 months, running reconnaissance in a stretch of desert so forgotten that even the maps had stopped naming it. Supplies came once a week. Communication with command was unreliable at best. But in the middle of nowhere, Captain Brooks somehow kept morale intact. Her men called her Brooks, not ma'am, and she never corrected them. She believed rank meant little when bullets started flying. What mattered was trust. She had that quiet kind of command, the kind that didn't shout or demand, but made everyone straighten up anyway. She'd share her rations when someone forgot theirs, stay up late to help a medic check the gear, or take the night watch even when she didn't have to. Most of her soldiers were a few years younger. Kids, really, barely out of training. And to them, Elena wasn't just their captain. She was a shield. That night, they'd gathered outside the comms tent. A faint glow from a lantern cast soft shadows across their faces. The desert wind had eased for once, and for the first time in weeks, they were just people again, swapping stories, teasing each other, pretending the world wasn't on fire beyond the ridgeline. Brooks was mid-laugh when the radio crackled. It wasn't unusual. Comms flickered all the time. Static, broken words, interference from storms. But something about the way the sound cut through the laughter made every head turn. It wasn't random static this time. There was rhythm in it. Panic. Captain, we need backup. The voice was small, faint, half-drowned in static, but it was unmistakable. Lieutenant Harris. He was on patrol, 20 clicks east, leading the 2nd Recon Unit. They weren't due to check in for another hour. Brooks froze mid-breath, eyes narrowing. The men around her exchanged glances, joking faces melting into silence. Repeat. Harris, she said into the mic, voice low, steady, a tone her soldiers had never heard from her before. You're breaking up. Say again. There was no answer. Just the hiss of dead air. Then, faintly, a sound that made everyone's stomach drop. Gunfire. Brooks stood up so fast her chair tipped backward. The shift was instant. Laughter gone, warmth replaced by a sharp, commanding edge. Gear up, she said. No hesitation. No second guessing. She didn't raise her voice, but it cut through the tent like a blade. Now, the men scrambled. Boots slammed against the dirt. Magazines clicked into place, helmets pulled down tight. The calm evening had turned electric. And in the middle of it all, Captain Brooks moved like she'd been built for that moment, checking weapons, confirming coordinates, calling for the Humvees. One of her sergeants, Daniels, looked at her, eyes wide. Ma'am, we don't even know their position. Command hasn't cleared. I don't need clearance, she said, sliding her rifle strap over her shoulder. They're my people. He didn't argue again. In less than 2 minutes, the joking squad from the fire pit had become a unit of soldiers, faces set, hearts pounding. But none of them could shake what they'd just seen. The same woman who had been laughing seconds ago, light in her eyes, hair falling loose around her collar, was now all precision and power. Every motion calculated, every order crisp. And in that moment, they realized something they'd never said out loud. They didn't just like their captain. They believed in her. The radio hissed again, the voice more desperate now. They've got us pinned. 5 hostiles, maybe more. We're losing cover. Brooks didn't hesitate. We're coming to you. Harris, hold your position. Do not engage further. We're moving. Then she turned to her team. 12 soldiers staring at her, waiting. We go quiet. We go fast. Eyes on me. The engines roared to life, cutting through the quiet desert night. The convoy peeled away from camp, kicking up dust and flame-colored sand. Inside the lead Humvee, the only sound was the thrum of tires and the occasional crackle of the radio. Brooks sat in the passenger seat, rifle across her lap, eyes forward. Her mind was already mapping the terrain, calculating the best route, the fastest approach, the likeliest ambush points. Behind her, the younger troops whispered to each other, still shaken by the shift they'd witnessed. One of them murmured, "How can she stay that calm?" Another answered, "Because she has to." Outside, the desert stretched endless, the horizon glowing faintly with distant fire. Brooks's reflection in the windshield flickered, half in shadow, half in light, a symbol of everything she carried. Responsibility, fear, the weight of every soul under her command. She thought briefly of the morning, of how she'd promised them a proper breakfast if they finished the perimeter sweep early. It felt like another lifetime ago. But promises mattered, small or big, and she'd keep this one too. She'd bring them back. All of them. As the convoy neared the ridge, she picked up the radio again, her voice calm but urgent. "Echo team, you've got eyes?" Silence. Then a burst of static, and a sound that froze everyone in the vehicle. Screams. Gunfire. Brooks's hand tightened on the mic. Her jaw clenched. "Push it," she ordered, voice cutting through the chaos. The driver slammed the accelerator. And just like that, the laughter from an hour ago was gone, swallowed by the thunder of engines and the smell of dust and fear. But none of them knew, not yet, that what waited beyond that ridge would change how they saw her forever. Because before dawn broke, before the last bullet hit the sand, they learned exactly who their captain really was. The ridge came into view just as the first orange light of dawn began to stretch across the horizon. Smoke curled upward from beyond it, thin but steady, the kind that meant a firefight was still burning. The convoy screeched to a halt, dust swallowing the vehicles. Captain Elena Brooks was the first to step out. The air smelled of iron and burnt oil. Her soldiers fanned out behind her, scanning the terrain. Somewhere out there, Harris and his team were fighting for their lives. Brooks crouched low, pulling out her binoculars. Through the rising haze, she could see muzzle flashes, close, too close. Harris's unit had taken cover behind a broken transport vehicle, cut off on 3 sides. The hostiles were moving in fast. She didn't have time to wait for backup. She didn't even have time to think. "Daniels, take 3 left and get eyes on that flank," she ordered. "Morgan, you're with me. We're cutting straight through." "Straight through?" "Ma'am, that's open ground. I know. No hesitation. No fear." She adjusted her helmet, took a breath, and sprinted. Her boots hit the sand like thunder, each step measured and sure. Gunfire cracked around her, sharp, deafening, but she didn't duck. She moved with purpose, calm in the chaos, her rifle raised and steady. Behind her, Morgan followed, cursing under his breath, but unable to look away from the woman leading him through hell. The enemy never saw it coming. Brooks dropped into a slide behind a half-buried wall, popped up, and fired 3 clean shots. Precise, surgical. 2 silhouettes fell instantly. The third tried to retreat. She tagged him before he made it 5 steps. When she reached Harris's position, he was pinned behind the smoking vehicle, blood seeping through his sleeve. His eyes widened as she appeared beside him. Out of nowhere, like she'd stepped out of the dust itself. "Captain? How the hell?" "Save it," she said, reloading. "Where's your medic?" "Gone. Caught in the first burst. Then we finished this fast." She leaned out, firing controlled bursts toward the ridgeline, while signaling for her second squad to flank. Every command was clean, deliberate. No wasted motion, no panic. It was like she could see the entire battlefield laid out in her mind, every possible outcome branching in front of her, and she was 3 moves ahead of all of them. Within minutes, the tide shifted. Her squads converged from both sides, cutting through the hostiles with frightening precision. The last one dropped his weapon and ran. Brooks didn't chase. She simply called it in, her voice even. "Echo team secured. 6 wounded. No fatalities. Situation stable." The silence that followed felt heavier than the gunfire. Her soldiers stood scattered among the wreckage, panting, shaking, but alive. Harris looked at her again, still trying to process what he'd just seen. This woman, who'd been laughing over cold coffee an hour ago, had just led a textbook rescue under impossible odds, and made it look effortless. Brooks holstered her weapon, scanning the horizon one last time before turning back to her men. "Check everyone. Hydrate. We move in 15. No grand speech. No dramatic gesture. Just quiet authority, and the unspoken understanding that they'd follow her anywhere." Daniels approached her, still catching his breath. "Captain, how did you stay so calm out there?" Brooks looked at him, her expression unreadable for a moment. Then she simply said, "Because they needed me to be." And that was it. As the sun broke fully over the desert, painting everything gold, her soldiers watched her walk away to check on the wounded. The woman who'd been the heart of their laughter was now the anchor of their survival. For the first time, they understood why command trusted her with lives, and why, despite her youth, no one dared call her anything less than Captain Brooks. She didn't smile again until later that night, when the smoke had cleared and the stars returned. Then, sitting by the same lantern as before, she took a sip of cold coffee, looked at her team, and said softly, "Next time, remind me not to laugh too hard before a mission. Seems to jinx us." They laughed, not because it was funny, but because they were alive to hear her say it. And for them, that was enough. By the time they returned to base, dawn had burned into a pale, unforgiving light. The adrenaline had faded, leaving silence in its wake. That strange kind of quiet that only comes after survival. The men unloaded in wordless rhythm, each face marked by exhaustion, but every eye drawn toward one person. Captain Elena Brooks walked a few steps ahead of them, dust-streaked and unshaken, her expression calm, unreadable. Inside the debrief tent, the radio was still hissing faintly, replaying fragments of the earlier distress call like an echo from another lifetime. "Captain, we need backup." Those words had started it all, and now, listening to them again, the men finally understood the weight of what she carried. The choice to lead, to step into chaos without flinching, to make her own calm in the storm. When command finally reached them hours later, sending their usual barrage of questions and praise, Brooks gave only a short report. All accounted for. No losses. Nothing more. No mention of how she'd run into the fire, or how she'd refused to leave anyone behind. To her, that was the job. But to everyone who'd been there, it was something else entirely. That night, after the reports were signed and the camp had gone still, Brooks sat alone by the edge of the outpost. The desert stretched endlessly before her, quiet now, almost gentle. She took off her helmet, let the night air touch her face, and for the first time since the call came in, she allowed herself to breathe. Morgan approached quietly, carrying 2 tin cups of instant coffee. He set one beside her without saying anything. For a long time, they just sat there. No rank, no formality, just shared silence between people who'd seen too much. Finally, he said softly, "You saved us, Captain." Brooks didn't look at him. Her eyes stayed on the horizon. "No," she said. "We saved each other." He nodded, and that was the end of it. But something had changed, something permanent. Word spread through the camp over the next few days, stories muttered by tired voices over midnight rations. The legend of that night grew, of how their captain charged through open ground, how she never hesitated, how her voice on the comms never cracked even once. The younger recruits began to whisper her name differently. Not Brooks. Not even the captain. They said it the way soldiers say the names of people they'd follow anywhere, like a promise. Weeks later, when their rotation ended and the next unit arrived to relieve them, one of the new privates pointed at her across the yard. "That's her, right? The one from the backup call." Harris overheard him, smiled faintly, and said, "Yeah, that's her." Then, after a pause, "Don't be fooled by the laugh. When it counts, she's the calmest storm you'll ever see." And somewhere out there in the desert wind, as the convoy engines rumbled to life and the horizon swallowed their tracks, Elena Brooks allowed herself one small smile. Not pride, not relief, just quiet gratitude that her people were alive, that the laughter would come again, that tomorrow would still rise. Because that was her kind of victory, not the medals, not the commendations. It was the sound of breathing soldiers at dawn. The proof that leadership wasn't about shouting orders, but about standing tall when fear tried to take the air from everyone else. And maybe, one day, years from now, when someone finds her old field journal or a faded photo from that night, They'll ask who she was, that young woman who smiled like she'd never seen war, but fought like she'd lived 100 battles. And someone will answer softly, she was laughing over a joke with her comrades, until the channel opened. And from that moment on, no one ever saw her the same way again.